Welcome to Tuesdays with Andrea. It's the inspiration station for everyday people guiding humanity forward. I'm your host, Andrea Rios McMillan, and every week I pursue conversations that matter with people who can relate to the common struggles we all face. You'll get to know the person behind the profession and find commonality with people of all ages, cultures, and backgrounds. Listen as friends, neighbors, and coworkers offer meaningful, personal explorations of modern life and the values we hold dear, all for the purpose of strengthening and uplifting others.
So today we have Tony Kokalj. He is a counselor that our family uses and has been very instrumental in helping us navigate through tough times and process important decisions. Tony, thank you so much for joining.
No, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So I have questions. With everything going on right now, we're kind of navigating three crises right now. We have the COVID-19 pandemic and its resurgence, but then we also have the Black Lives Matter and social justice initiatives. And then the third is the economic crisis, the fallback from COVID-19, and people are losing jobs, people are losing income, and the certainty of the future is just not there right now. We don't know what's going to happen. I'm interested in learning more about what you can share with us about what you're seeing in your field.
I mean, I definitely, I would say, gosh, it's just been seeing so many new aspects just because of everything you just talked about. And I think what really hit a lot of people the hardest was the anxiety and the stress and depression for a lot of individuals, was just increasing. And so just as we're about to turn the corner, with opening that weekend up, is when, everything happened, with the George Floyd, the social injustice and the Black Lives Matter. And so it was like just when individuals were getting a little bit more confidence to go back out there again, then in comes now this other crisis. Mm-hmm. And so it was like a major, setback for a lot of individuals that were really looking forward to starting some sense of normalcy for their families, for their kids. It just took it to a whole different level. So just as we as mental health providers were getting good strategies and ways to help people kind of get ramped up to getting back out there again, now we have to get back and readjust and figure how to talk about now these new issues that are coming up.
Did it feel like almost a deflation for you as a mental health provider? Like, okay, the bubble's here and, we're almost, and then all of a sudden, boom, somebody popped the bubble again. How do you deal with that as the person that we go to?
There's a saying that goes, you can do the time or you can let the time do you. And so I took it apart for me to really set up a schedule to try to create some sense of normalcy, making sure that I would incorporate working out, making sure that I could incorporate, managing time with family and everything else, because in the beginning, I knew it was going to be a couple of months at least. So I tried different ways to adjust to it, especially from a time management standpoint, because everybody's time was all over the place.
Yeah, kids before going to bed at 9 and now they're going to bed at 2 a.m.
Yes.
And work has not stopped, actually, because everything is online.
Correct. I felt bad for a lot of clients that I was working with. Teachers, for example, that was a big one. The teachers that I was working with had to adjust and learn all these new things, the Zoom meetings. And oh, by the way, at the same time that they're managing and trying to create new curriculum that's never existed before, now they also have to go ahead and make sure that their kids are being taught as well. So I think that was the same thing for some of those teachers, that here they were getting done with the school year and all right, a little bit of relief. And then here we go. There's now these new crises that comes up. And I mean, I actually had a conversation with a client late last week, an African-American client of mine, and she goes, she's not one to really post things on Facebook and she's not very outspoken person. But what hurt her the most was what she had pointed out to me was kind of eye-opening was, gosh, I have all these friends, they post stuff to me on Facebook. They, ask how my family's doing, how my kids are. But when this happened, with George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, it was like radio silence, and felt very hurt by a lack of friends of hers, regardless of color, but especially some of her white friends that didn't reach out just to see what's going on, just to connect. And she was really hurt by that. So these are just things that in as much as I try to help clients, a lot of times they're educating me as well. Yeah, I'm learning different aspects as well. It's a two-way street, definitely.
Do you find that it's harder now to have these discussions with clients?
When you're talking about coming in as a family, coming in and seeing me and feeling comfortable, and you feeling comfortable, and John feeling comfortable and connecting, I think that's the best way that we're able to broach some of those barriers and those stigmas. Because when it comes down to it, for me personally, and I think this is the way my clients are, I want help. Mm-hmm. And if you can help me, I don't care what your race is. I don't care what your religion is. I don't care about any of that. If you are a genuine person and I feel like you genuinely care, that's really the thing that matters most to me, because I do care. I've been married going on 15 years now in a couple months, and I've got 2 kids, my daughter 13, Peyton, and Reed, 9. So I care a lot about families and kids. Yeah. And so I'm able to connect with a lot of different ranges and diversity in culture and background.
So tell me about your path towards becoming a counselor. Did you always know you want to be a counselor?
I was always good at, it seemed like people were drawn to me to talk to me about things. I can especially, remember going into junior high, even in high school, girls would come to me with their problems or issues.
You were the listener.
I was the listener. I think there's something about somebody that's empathetic. I didn't have this level of insight then, but when you have that level of empathy, I think other people are drawn to it. And I think even more so in today's day and age, when everybody's so self-centric, and egotistical, and they're kind of so into themselves. Yeah. That when they're having problems, individuals like myself and so many other people that work with me in my profession, it's they're just like a moth to a flame. So I think
they
that
find
that
you
component,
somehow.
They do. They find you. You have that face of and you have that face, Andrea. You have the face oh my gosh, I think I would totally talk to you about my problems and issues. You would listen to me.
Yeah. Well, when I have a problem, I look for people who might know an answer. That's really what this podcast is about. And how do we share more of those people with the world? Because it helps. And I know firsthand it helps. And I think mental health and focusing on the stories that we tell ourselves and the ways that we can change our outcomes simply by looking at a different perspective, or even being educated on minor things like the process of grief, right? If I didn't know the process of grief, I would have thought I was crazy, or my husband was crazy learning about grief cycles and stages. But those are simple things that aren't taught in school. They're not taught in work. It's kind of like a free-for-all unless you have experience of someone who's really well coped and well adjusted and highly, motivated and successful. That's, I think, what we have to do is seek out these people who show glimmers of hope and a better path.
Yeah, and I think that's also probably the way I'm able to connect too, because I have worked for everything, to get to this point. My parents were kids, when they had me. They were in high school, just getting out of high school. They both worked. My grandparents raised me during the day while they were working, and grew up on the east side of Joliet. So definitely had no levels of entitlement, at all. And haven't been the strongest or the tallest. So there's always been this proverbial chip on my shoulder.
Did you have siblings?
I had one brother. He's younger. He's 8 years younger than me. So it's a bit of a
You're the
gap
older.
there.
Okay.
So
were you the oldest though?
Yes.
You are the oldest?
Yes.
So did you get it harder? Or were you kind of the quintessential older child in that way?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. I think I can see the tears of how my dad, raised me, to my brother, to my kids. So it's
totally
different variations of evolution. Definitely.
Growing up, did you have a good relationship with your family though?
We had struggles, definitely. It was easy for me once I got my own counseling myself to understand, that dynamic. Being that they're younger parents, of course, they made mistakes. My dad didn't always have to have the best temperament in the world. And so, it grew up in a very difficult household, at times, both physically and emotionally. But at the same time, that's, and you hear this all the time, and you hate to make this an excuse, but they were doing the best with what they had. Doesn't mean that it was good. It's kind of like when I tell clients, hey, just because you accept something doesn't mean you like it. Definitely those components there, had me face some anxiety issues and depression issues. That also is something that is very helpful to especially like my adolescent clients, when I can share with them, yeah, I've had those struggles before. Definitely my anxiety is like probably was my number one issue. My mind is always racing around to this date. So to be able to, share what that feels like, it's hard to relate. So if I have a client that they're opening up and talking about having like a panic attack, I'll share with them, yes, I get it. The heart feels like it's going to pop out of your chest. You're all tense. Your neck is all tensed up. You're raring to go. You're upset stomach. You're hyperactive. You're sweating. So I get it. And so I think by the upbringing that I had, and at times I wish that some of those things didn't happen, but ultimately, if I didn't have those experiences, then I wouldn't have had those types of feelings of depression, of anxiety, and therefore wouldn't be able to empathize and relate to the clients I work with today. So sometimes the sweet ain't as sweet without the bitter. So that's how I try to look at it. Look at now, we're having a podcast talking about like mental health and communication and family systems and all of us being open about our own stuff and therapy and all that. That wasn't happening.
No.
When we were growing up, like with our parents weren't exposed to that. They didn't have any of those tools whatsoever.
And then likewise, we have to figure out how we can help the next generation when I'm still trying to figure out how to stay afloat, right?
I think that's the thing is that, so many times we get involved with this, like, gosh, look at these Facebook families. They have it all together.
They're
and
so
it's like,
perfect.
Well, that's not real. That's not real. So, just last night I'm talking to a couple about communication issues me and my wife had over the weekend, where just expressing to them, here's where it could have fell off the rails into an argument or disagreement, but we're able to pull it back and really resolve it. So using personal experiences because that's real. That's reality. Even though I'm a counselor and my wife Lee is, well educated, she has her master's in education, we all have issues. We all have problems. It's active, it's fluid. And just when we think we got it all figured out, we don't.
What does your wife say dealing with a counselor for a husband? Is that hard for her? Do you ever analyze her?
My mind's always analyzing all the time, but but I made it a point, like I knew I needed somebody that was going to challenge me. I knew that I needed somebody that didn't need me. So when I met my wife, she was more educated. She was, teaching in Blue Island, doing really well for herself. She was independent. And like begrudgingly, I was really attracted to her, but I also knew like, oh my gosh, like this is somebody that's not going to put up with my BS.
This is a level up.
This is a level up. And so she always challenges me. And so because of that, that's where, there is no doing any kind of psycho analyzing or anything like that. She's going to call me out on my stuff. And I always respect her for that because it challenges me and it prevents me from not owning and being accountable for some of the things I need to be accountable for. And sometimes we're going to throw a zinger out. That's what happened to me on Saturday. It was like throwing something out that like, initially you want that back, but then what's the recovery process going to be?
What is it?
How quickly can I like recognize I shouldn't have done that or shouldn't have said that, and then get into that conversation, get into that repair. That's where we fail a lot of times as couples, because instead of putting out like a really, really, really small fire, we avoid it. We avoid it, and then the resentment starts to build up. And then that's what the difference is of, maybe it ruins an hour or so, but it doesn't ruin the night. It doesn't ruin the weekend. When we can communicate with our partner and have some resolution to these things as they come across us, that's, what marriage is, because marriage is like a business, like a restaurant. Everything's constantly changing. Like you can't get lazy.
Right.
You always have to have constant communication.
So how do you go about understanding people's personality styles and the way that they deal with conflict in a way that gets somewhere? I think that's very hard.
It's always communication, and so I always implement one of the theories that we use is, Gottman, and he talks about like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse.
Can you explain that?
Yeah. So, perception is reality. So how I perceive things, how you perceive things may be totally different, but it's our reality. So if I'm saying something that, you perceive that I'm being very critical, whether maybe it's my tone of voice or the subject matter, like whatever the case might be, you receive it as criticism. Hopefully I'll be aware of that by body language, but if not, I need to learn that because I need to learn how to change that. Because if I don't change that, then when we're critical to somebody else, oftentimes gloves are off, they're going to get defensive. They're going to become defensive. And this is what happens a lot of times in arguments with couples. Mm-hmm. You say something, you say the wrong words, and here comes a rebuttal. And then here the gloves come off. And it never stays on topic. And then you're bringing up stuff that happened last week or 2 years ago.
You're bringing it up, throwing it in, using whatever you can do.
Yeah, and it becomes a huge mess. And then what happens over time, like with that type of dynamic, communication-wise, is then, well, instead of having
yes, please tell me all the ways
fights,
my communication styles are unhealthy.
No, so then after a while, it's like a self-preservation thing, and phones are a good example of it now. So I could be looking at my phone, and you're yelling at me or arguing with me, and I'm not, I'm hearing and listening to you, but I'm using this as an avoidance method.
Yeah.
Because that way I could just get out of this situation maybe quicker, so that the argument doesn't have to be 30 minutes long. It's only 5 minutes long. That's a concept of avoidance, stonewalling, which often is human nature.
Yeah.
If we're not going to get any resolution, why get into these heated battles back and forth? That's really where the red flags are in a relationship of any kind, because when it reaches that point, when we're doing that avoidance, either physically avoiding or looking at our phones, being at the same couch, but different devices, then that's where the resentment starts to come into place. And that resentment is over just like little things. It's kind of like the sands in the hourglass, okay? And I'm not talking about days of our lives.
Right.
So it adds up. It adds up over time. And that resentment then becomes toxic within a relationship, because then at that point, we're not willing to give on anything.
No, because at that point, I've already built up a scenario in my mind that you are against me. You do not care. This is where the resentment, I think, it changes. Maybe hardens the heart is the better word, or hardens the mind, but allows no other thought to come in that goes against what I've already decided.
Yeah, absolutely. And not only do I use this as an example in marriage counseling, but it's communication within the family. Because a lot of times, and I have to be mindful of this as well, my daughter who's 13, and, things that I might say to her that used to just roll off her back, but, now she's having her own opinions on things. Now she's, watching a lot of different stuff. She's educated on a lot of different things. And so I got to keep in mind, okay, different things that I might say that she might be sensitive to, and how to approach that. And sometimes as parents, we feel like, well, I don't need to do that. It kind of goes back to maybe some of the ways that we were raised. Like, no, this is the way it is. And so you're going to believe what I believe, and try to shove my opinion onto hers, instead of taking a step back. And it's like, hey, you know what? I got to do the same thing that I do for my wife as I do for my kids. It could be no different. You have to modify how you approach things because every kid is different. My daughter came out and she was anxious to the core when we'd get her to sleep, and we'd put her down in bed like Mission Impossible. And if there was any kind of like hesitation, she'd ramp up, and there goes another 20, 30 minutes of the night.
Is that a sign of anxiousness for children?
Temperament is something that we're born with. That's why many times, as much as we put these labels on things, we're quick to be like, okay, they're anxiety, they're this, they're that.
Yeah.
I had a professor, my good mentor, my Dr. Ed Kearney, and he told me, Tony, you'll get this when you have 2 kids or more than 2. Temperament from birth. You can just see the differences in their personality styles, how they adapt to things, how they react to things. And so that's to be true, like I said, with my daughter and, her nervousness or anxiety. That's been there from the get-go. We had to bounce her around from one thing to another. Fast forward to my son, Reed, and we nicknamed him Simple Man. It was one of his nicknames because you'd almost forget him. He'd be the kid, like when you hear some of these stories, sometimes like mom or dad forgets, like, kid.
Yeah, they forgot me. Did you forget him?
He was so chill. No, we didn't leave him. We didn't leave him.
Oh, did you ever leave him at the store?
But
he's going to bring that up if that happened.
No, didn't happen. There was no news story on any kind of patch of any kind. He would be so chill, like, wherever he was relaxing at, that we would be like, oh, where's Reed at? Oh, he's in the living room, because he would be just so chill, so relaxed. And that translates into his personality now. Like, I could give him like a $5 bill and tell him to go up to the restaurant bar and ask for a Coke, and he would do it.
Yeah.
Like, and if I were to do that to my daughter, I could say, here's $100.
And she wouldn't do it.
Ask for a Coke and keep the change. And she said, I'm good.
Is that personality? Is there also like a shyness factor to that? Or is there a part of that is more learned behavior?
I think there's a combination of both. I think that it's nature via nurture. So, I think going back to, I can obviously, relate more with my daughter in this extent, because I was that.
Yeah.
Like, I can remember being nervous and anxious in situations. And so I think being able to talk about it with her was, definitely something that I didn't have. So kind of expressing her or explaining to her or trying to push her out of her comfort zone.
Yeah, like coaching
in certain
her.
situations. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Like that helps. Getting her in line with, so she wanted to do cheerleading. And so I knew that she needed a coach that could be warm and fuzzy, knew when to back off, but then knew when to push, but needed to earn her trust so she felt comfortable. And luckily I found...
You found the perfect cheerleader.
Great coach. great coach. She's phenomenal, and did private lessons with her. And she was like the tumbling whisperer, because not only did she get my daughter to have like basically very minimal skill set to being able to compete on the cheerleading team this past year. They got 4th in the state out of 19 teams, but to her confidence level. She helped boost her confidence level by like you said, the coaching to her personality style, to her temperament. That's what we have to do, with our kids, which makes it tougher. It makes it much more difficult, because when we grew up, it was, here's the rules. Doesn't matter what your temperament is or what your personality style is. This is the way it's going to be for everybody. We're not going to adapt.
We're not catering to anyone. Yeah, it's my way. Okay, so here's the other question I was going to ask you. Is that a generational thing? Is that generational thinking of we're not going to cater to the child? Is that changed forever?
Generationally, we've gone from one spectrum to the other. So we've went from authoritarian, which was the my way or the highway. And, there was more corporal punishment. And yes, there was definitely a lot of things that were extreme. And then we went from that to, I think, our generation, because a large part of us were exposed to that, to more of the like permissive type parenting, even the permissiveness in the schools or the permissiveness in sports.
So what does that do? How has that changed this generation of students? Like, what have you seen you're the one who sees these high school students in and out?
I think, unfortunately, what that's caused, even though the intent was good, like to give them kind of the warm and fuzzies, but kind of what we were doing was like overcompensating for what we didn't have. And I think what that did was it decreased the resiliency in a lot of kids.
Yeah.
So one of the main things I encourage parents now, especially for their younger kids, is let them fail. Let them struggle in certain situations that we have some control over, because that helps build that resiliency. And I've always been honest and direct with my kids, sometimes maybe too honest, but I've always told them, even with my son who's in baseball right now on a traveling team, he's got tryouts coming up next week. And I said, hey, listen, nothing's guaranteed.
So is he still practicing right now?
He is, yes. They're practicing. They had a tournament just this past weekend in Iowa. So, which that was like a breath of fresh air, because their restrictions are limited.
It was normal again. Maybe
it's normal, and we're outside.
Yeah,
everybody's outside. Okay, we're being safe.
Yeah,
these are families that all know each other. But I guess so. I told him, hey, tryouts are next week for the upcoming season. Nothing's guaranteed, and if you're not good enough, you won't make it.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that you have to quit baseball, but that means you have to try harder if you really want it.
That means you have to get off the video game.
Absolutely, yes. Taking those moments to push our kids. There's times where we need to back off. There's times where we need to stroke. There's times where we need to slap. And, I know that's hard for parents because, they want their kids to succeed and thrive. But if they don't suffer a little bit.
Yeah.
And that's where that's that's where I let go of a lot of that resentment I did have, when I went through counseling that I had towards my parents, but my dad in particular, because my counselor blew my mind and basically pointed it out to me. You don't have those experiences, and then you don't have this level of empathy, then you can't connect. So a gift that you have came from struggles that maybe at times when things were happening that I played the victim role, but then after getting through it, persevering through it, and recognizing good can come out of that. So by no means am I saying, hey, let's go back to like beating our kids.
No,
okay?
yeah.
No, but needing to push them so that they can build up that level of resiliency.
Yeah. And what I think the beautiful thing about what you're saying, so when our family went in, it was a hard time. We, as parents, and we're also young parents, we don't know what the heck we're doing. We don't have a lot of strong marriages and experience of people staying married in our family. I grew up with a single mom. He grew up with a single mom. Our dads are gone. We both, at some point, not sure how we're going to make it in this world. And we have another kid, and then 3 boys, and we have such different parenting style. So when we were working with you, what it allowed me to do was understand how to relate in a different way with my husband and how to understand him better, but then also how to understand his priority with our son, like true and trusting that intention, the value of having other people who understand what you're going through is essential right now. What are some things that we should be mindful of as parents?
I think the biggest thing that I can recommend is the need to stay present. Information and everything is so like fluidly changing day by day, week by week, and especially in relationship to COVID, kids reentering school, how school's going to look. And I think to look at it too in depth now, it will give parents and kids like anxiety, whether it's going to elementary school, going to college, because I think there's still so many things that are kind of up in the air. So I don't want to go ahead and tell my kid the CDC guidelines right now of, hey, you're going to have to like be in every other day going to school, and you're going to have to go into like a bus and sit 2 feet away or 6 feet away from somebody. And then you have to have masks on all day, and you can't eat lunch with your friends. I don't even want to go there until I have to go there.
Yeah.
So it's like worry about something when there's something to worry about. So if and when those times come, then we can have those conversations then. So it's not adding way too much stress onto them.
Yeah. Okay, so for your 13-year-old, even your son, have you noticed any change or impact on their life through this? Or anything that you're concerned about right now as a dad?
One thing that I did throughout this process, and my wife did as well, is we always made sure that we were really touching base with them on a consistent basis, especially my daughter at 13, because she was one that was looking forward to competing for a state opportunity, in track, and that season went away. She had good friends of hers that were supposed to go to state for wrestling, and that same week that everything shut down, she was, much more affected and impacted by it. She's the social butterfly, and between that and sports, it hit her, really hard. Mm-hmm. So it was making it a point to, try to keep people safe at the beginning and do what we were supposed to do in terms of quarantining, which we did strictly. And then in making sure she had those outlets through, talking to her friends through, online or through Snapchat or whatever, whatever we could possibly do. And sometimes maybe it was a little bit over of what we would normally do, but we were trying to take that in consideration with everything. She doesn't have the school as an outlet. Social isolation is not a good thing for anyone.
Yeah.
That's the whole mental health component of it, because nobody wants to talk about that. As far as numbers go, that's a whole different podcast, Andrea.
Social isolation.
Yes, and depression and anxiety, and individuals that didn't even experience levels of anxiety and depression that are at all-time levels and highs, right now.
Oh, I'd love to do a follow-up on this.
Absolutely. There's all these different phobias. I just talked to a woman today who she's been in her apartment in Chicago. She works out there. She has not really stepped out pretty much at all throughout this whole process because of how much the fears have impacted, her. Still, works from home and gets groceries, everything done.
Right. That makes me wonder what kind of effect this is going to have on us as a whole going forward, right?
Well, I think it's when we need to be safely getting out there and socializing and being there with friends, being there with family, being in there, and like I said, safe gatherings, because we need that social component. We need that social connection. And I think I've seen too many people even get reliant on Zoom meetings and, oh, this is what I'll do forever. And it's like, well, that's not a healthy thing, especially for people, like myself, like you, my wife, we're all family orientated. We want to be with family. We want to be connected.
Yeah.
I don't want to give somebody a hug through plexiglass.
Right.
And I'm not saying that means being irresponsible,
no, but
definitely, yes. Like it's seeing those secondary effects that nobody is talking about. Nobody's really discussing a whole lot of what I'm seeing, on a day-to-day basis. But because of all that, going back to, your point with my kids, that's where, we made sure that we were touching base on her mental health and being direct and asking those questions. I can't stress that enough to parents. Hey, are you feeling depressed? Are you feeling okay? Are you sad? Are you upset about something? Do you need somebody to talk to? Do you want to talk to your mom and not talk to me about it? That's the whole misconception where I don't want to ask my kid if they're depressed because maybe I'm then going to get that in their head. No.
I know that like even the suicide, when the suicide conversations were heavy, and there's a lot of kids who commit suicide more so nowadays than I was used to growing up. And it was a hard conversation because you don't want to plant the seed. In my mind, I don't want to plant the seed, but then at the same time, I'd rather him be informed about what's going on than not. And I feel like he's already hearing it from other people. I want to at least offer my perspective to him on the subject matter. And then sometimes they don't want to hear it either.
No. And to that point too, that's why I tell parents, be involved, not just with your kids, but what their kids are watching, what their social media is, creeping on them if necessary, because, you have to. I know some parents are sometimes uncomfortable with it and they say, well, I want to give them privacy.
I was just going to ask, what's your stance on privacy for teenagers?
Well, I've got a 13-year-old daughter, okay, that when her and my wife went swimsuit shopping a few weeks back and they came back and, she showed me some of the swimsuits she got, I asked my wife, where's all the material?
Where's the rest of it?
What's going on here?
She's like, but it's fashion. It's cute.
And
even though the pools are closed.
Yes. Well, we do have a pool, in our backyard.
Is yours open?
It is.
Nice.
She was getting primed and ready for that. But
yeah, to
that point, I can't close my eyes and think to myself, well, you know what? I'm sure that, nobody is trying to, talk to her or message her. She's a teenage girl now. So, if I'm going to allow her to have certain applications like Instagram or, TikTok or anything like that, then I have to be, or my wife has to monitor those things. We got to monitor the content of what they're putting out there, because first and foremost, like I told her, what you put out there is going to be a representative of who you are, not just, now, but down the road. Because if you put something that's offensive, if you put something that is constituted as racist or whatever the case might be, even though it wasn't directly done, because that's the thing with TikToks, right? They're dances. Okay, everybody's doing these dances. But then if you hear some of the music being played in the background with these dances, maybe you're dancing, you're not saying the lyrics and you're not speaking it, but you're associated with it.
Yeah,
exactly. And trying to educate, her and on those types of things, or if you're a part of, some type of group chat, and even though you're not the one that's saying bad stuff about somebody, you got to be away from that group chat, because that's a part of bullying. Just because you're not being a part of that conversation, you're a part of that group. You need to get out of it. So
online bullying for teens right now, that is their only social interaction right now is online for most teenagers. How do you deal with that? What is the advice for dealing with the social media, the constant consumption and everything else that is accessible via online at, kids' fingertips, because every kid has a phone now?
Yeah, I think the number one, going back to the privacy point, I think the monitoring thing is the biggest thing. Parents, need to be able to monitor, have access whether they're linked in as friends, know their passwords, because that doesn't mean you have to constantly 100% be checking it. But for example, like if I felt like, there was something off with my kid mood-wise, right? Because we should be able to read our kids pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably a moment where I'm definitely engaging with her or engaging with him, trying to talk, see what's going on. But then I probably would be maybe searching for things, looking for things, just to see if there isn't something underlying. So by no means am I saying I need to police my kids 24/7, but definitely being able to stay engaged, because to your point, like the social media, aspect of the cyberbullying is just horrible. It's horrible. And so not only do I look out for it for my daughter, but I encourage and advocate for her. If you see this stuff, whether it's with friends or people please come to me and talk to me about it, or your mom, so we can make sure that if it's something really bad, that we can try to help, that friend, or try to reach out to that parent, to let them know what's going on.
It seems nowadays, that there's way more division and way more resentment. How do we deal with, even with people we thought we loved or knew or respected? What are those ways to overcome those difficult divides?
So with these big topics, you do not text these things. You don't Instagram. You don't Snapchat these things. You don't Facebook these things. You pick up a phone, or you go face to face and you have a conversation. Mm-hmm. Because individuals are less likely to be that confrontational or visceral, the same things that they post online. There's no way they're going to do it.
Right.
Verbally talking to us face to face. And that's the way that we can start having some of those conversations that, yes, that can be difficult, but we can have them face to face and get that person's perspective on it. And so for those that have asked throughout this process, those that felt the need, like I feel I need to do something, or I feel like I need to say something, I always say it starts in your own backyard. And
what do you mean it starts in your own backyard? What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is, take a look at yourself, number one, take a look at your family. Like I talked to somebody yesterday. If you can look in the mirror and say, gosh, I nailed it 100% today as a father, as a husband, like rock that out, perfection. Okay, then maybe you're at a point where you can start judging. I think that we need to look at self-improvement, what we need to do in our own relationships within our own family. And when it comes to these different topics, talk to a friend and don't assume things either. Okay, because let's not make assumptions across the board that everybody has the same opinions or, have the same responses to it. Don't assume.
Right. And that's so hard, because that's the first thing that I want to do all the time is assume. What are the questions to ask other than assume?
Well, no, I think for the clients I've talked to is just asking, so how have you been impacted by this? How has your life changed? I know we haven't gotten into this before, but I mean, is this something that you have experienced before? How does this trigger you? You tell me your story. You tell me how you're being impacted by it. Because that's been a lot of what hasn't been happening. Nobody listens.
Nobody listens.
And so whether we're dismissive about that and we're not listening, or I'm not listening to my daughter because she's just a teenager, because she's just 13, that's when there's a breakdown. That's when there's division.
And I love how you said that. You said it starts within your own home and not making assumptions and really looking at your own family unit. So as a mom in my family, are we saying, how's your marriage? How are your kids? Has their behavior changed during or throughout this? And to be really conscious of how we're relating from an interpersonal level. And if not, let's focus on that first before we try to go out and save the world.
Yes.
Right? That's what you're saying. Right?
Yes, absolutely. 100%. When I can say that we're up and running and we're in a good spot and everything's going on, like that's fine. But then even when we get to that point, let's not look at saving the world. Let's see what we can do in our community. Let's see what we can do in our, the areas that are around us or our friends. Instead of posting something on Facebook, why don't you pick up the phone and call? Or why don't you have that conversation, with that coworker, whatever the case might be. That's where you can start. You can't start to make any type of difference anywhere until you understand, which is why, going back to why people relate to me, because I get it. I understand. I've been through a lot. I'm more street smart than I am book smart. So I've been through those struggles.
When you say like I've been through those struggles and street smart, what do you mean? Because I look at you and your perfect life and your perfect family, and you can coach your daughter, and you guys are great, and you have that backyard pool. How can you relate to people who maybe think you can't?
Yeah, because I mean, I've had those, those negative aspects and characteristics of me. Okay. And that's the point that I think a lot of people have a hard time getting to. They can point out all the good stuff about themselves, like, man, I can listen and I'm empathetic. But there's been times where, I could also be, and have been, cold or withdrawn or have trust issues, and push back. I can be overly opinionated at times. I could be, arrogant at times. Now, those are aspects that some might say, oh my gosh, like those are kind of negative aspects. Well, yeah, but that's how people are. Okay, we've got good characteristics, but I also know the negative components of it.
Yeah.
And I think when you can be admitting to that.
Yes. Are you familiar with the Enneagram? And do you respect the Enneagram?
No, go ahead.
Do you know,
Teach
are you
me.
familiar?
No, teach me.
So the Enneagram is this circle diagram. We did it through our work and I loved it. We just did it last year, and it's similar to
like Myers-Briggs.
This one you have numbers, and basically it breaks down the personality types, and it's a pie shape. So you see what other people are and how it benefits you or hurts you. And it also talks about underlying needs. And I like what you just said. And the reason why I brought that up is because it was the first time where I saw that other people who look at things completely different from me offer me so much value in a way that I would have been blinded by if I didn't see that one circle diagram of why and how we can relate and why and how we don't relate. And it also freed me from like, there's going to be a lot of people who don't like me. I am just not their type. And it helped me to recognize, oh, this is where I fit in the pie chart. And I think sometimes we tend to close off to people who don't immediately agree with us or are like us. What would you say to that?
No, I think that's accurate. And I've been on both ends of the spectrum. So when I say like struggles and things that I've been through, I've been that anxious kid. I've been those periods and those struggles of being, depressed, lacking confidence in myself, wanting to be like in a shell, like wanting to be like the wallpaper, in the back of the classroom, so I've felt that before. And so
how do you overcome it?
Through therapy. I went to counseling. I serendipitously got linked in with, a guy that recognized that there were some things that were, struggling with me. He actually was first my psychology teacher and helped me to like literally learn, because I barely passed high school. I think they just let me graduate because my parents paid a lot of money, maybe on the side, to get me through. But I had struggles like with learning. And so probably could have been diagnosed with some type of learning disability, like ADD. It was always like the maintenance rehearsal, flashcards, all that stuff. And it just didn't compute for me. So in the class that I took, when I went back to college, he just saw that I was bright, but wasn't doing well. And so he pulled me aside and like literally taught me a different way to learn. And those strategies turned me into a straight A student.
What was that different way to learn?
Oh, it's called like elaborative rehearsal. It's a different form of learning where you take things that are already in your long-term memory and you connect them to new things that you're learning. So it may not be relatable to anybody else but yourself. But once we have stuff in our long-term memory, it's forever stored there. So if we can take something new and just loosely connect it, which is what he did with me with, at the time in Gen Psych world, for this learning thing, he was doing defense mechanisms. So he would have me get a piece of paper out, and he just told me he says, I'm going to give you these defense mechanisms, just draw like what comes to mind. He brought up rationalization, and I remember drawing a picture of a spaceman because with the little ration thing, because my parents went to NASA, and I was sick at the time and couldn't go, and they brought me back space rations. Projection, I drew a projector. The denial, I drew a little river, the Nile River. I thought it was completely ridiculous. And so I did all this. And then I remember about a week later, he asked me to name some defense mechanisms. And I was able to roll them off because I may have not known like the pure definition of it, but I was able to link it together. Yes. So it actually infuriated the mentor I was talking about earlier, Dr. Kearney. I didn't find this out until years later, but I took his child appraisal class. It was a master's level class at Lewis. It's a really, really hard class. It was like 3 weeks in, and I found this after the fact. He had went to Dr. Sheffer, who was another mentor of mine for social psychology, and she's like, you know, Susan, I got this kid in my class, and he hasn't opened up his notebook like once. He hasn't taken a note out, and he was like, I guess at the time, like ticked off.
Yeah.
And she goes, who is it? And he's, oh, this is Tony Kokalj, and he's like, oh. She's like, well, no, don't worry about it, Ed. Like, he's got it. So next class, he pulls me aside and starts like drilling me like with questions about child appraisal, and I'm hammering him off. And he's like, and then I explain my story, and he's like, now I get it.
What about the building confidence and then knowing that you are good at taking care of other people? Where did that switch happen?
That was with Tom Schweitzer, who, like I said, he was my Gen Psych teacher, but he also did counseling there at the school as well, at Joliet Junior College. He really helped to give me praise and validation about things that I had never received before, you know, in that way. Helped me to value that those aspects of what I do and my empathy and my ability to care and listen, those are really powerful tools. Those are really great gifts. So he was able to really point out things that I didn't look at and see in that light before. Right. I kind of dismissed it because it was kind of naturally just who I was.
Right.
You know, so when you're naturally like, it's kind of like maybe if you just maybe never took a cooking class, but you know, you're just naturally good in the kitchen and you can make stuff, right? And you weren't like classically trained. Somebody might be like, well, yeah, my stuff's okay. And you're like, no, that's phenomenal. You should.
Do you know that you did that for me?
Yes.
Yes, because I remember we were talking one day. You asked, what do you want, Andrea? And I was so focused on John and John's dynamic and being kind of middle person. And you're like, you need to focus on something else. You need something else to focus on. And I'm like, well, there's work. You're like, but what do you want for yourself? And I said, well, you know, I have this idea. I'm thinking about a podcast and I share it with you. And you were the person who was like, you can do it. It's a great idea. You could start this year. And I didn't start it that year. It was not last year. I started, you know, this year. But that was what you played in my life as an adult.
Well, because I could sense.
So thank you.
Well, you're welcome. All I am is a glorified GPS. Like I can give suggestions, but whether or not you follow or not is completely up to you. Because the ultimate goal for the clients that I work with and see is that I don't want to see you anymore. Meaning that I want to give you the tools.
Yeah, we don't want this to be a long term.
Right. I want to give you the guidance, and you know, then you can take off and run with it. Because if you choose to do it, then it's your choice, your decision. You did it, and that's true empowerment. You know, if I just told people what to do and gave deadlines on things, yeah, they might be successful, but they would lack that sense of empowerment. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, when I saw that with you, I'm like, this is something you're passionate about, and this is something that you need to do for yourself because you're so used to innately just doing for everyone else.
Yeah.
But then in the process, and this is what you're learning, I am sure of through these podcasts that you're doing, as I've learned through therapy, is the thing I get from it is I'm able to help people and I feel good about that. You know, so when people are like, oh, you know, you need to do things that are altruistic. Well, there's no really like true altruism, so to speak. You know, we're always
we all do
something
things because we're getting
we get
something from it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. But it's in a positive way, you know, so it's a way that it's individuals achieving their goals or, you know, being pushed to do certain things that they maybe you're second guessing or wouldn't normally do. And that was exactly what was done for me. You know, that was that same thing that was pushed for me. Like, Tony, you have a gift and you should follow it and don't listen to what anybody else has to say, because just as you would have a lot of critics in terms of what you wanted to do with this podcast, I had a lot of critics with, you're going to go into counseling. There's no money to be made there. Like, what are you going to do? You're going to be poor. What is it that you're going to do? You're just going to talk to people. Yeah. Ignore those loud voices. Follow your passion. That was actually one of the things that Tom Schweitzer, you know, told me. There's a book by Joseph Campbell, The Power of Myth. And one of the things in there, it talks about follow your bliss in life. If you follow your bliss in life, what you're passionate about, yeah, there's going to be times where it's going to be tough, but that's where we get through because we know that there's light at the end of the tunnel. I always give that example of like the movie Shawshank Redemption.
Oh, I love that movie.
Kept digging away.
Yeah.
Get busy living, get busy dying. And I took that and I ran with it with his encouragement. And then I made sure when I got to Lewis, after going to junior college, that I got linked in with who I know would be teachers that would challenge me. I wanted the best. I wanted Dr. Helm. I wanted Kim Duras. I wanted Dr. Sheffer. I wanted Ed Kearney because I knew that they were the best. And
did you seek them out at all?
Yes, absolutely. I sought them out by taking their classes and then just genuinely through my love for psychology and for love for their classes and us having side conversations, growing those friendships, outside of the classroom, and relied heavily on that with Dr. Kearney, who at the time was the chair of the department. And this was closer to me graduating, thinking about going into the master's program. And I said, just being honest with me, and do you think I could do this? Do you think I could do it? And do you think I can be successful? And if so, what do I need to do? And he said, absolutely. And, he spent, that day, an hour or so, mapping out all these different steps of what I needed to do. And I just followed him. So it's the key thing, and you brought this up, a little bit earlier, but the necessary need for us to have mentors in our life. And Dr. Helm always told me, Tony, make sure you have 4 or 5 people in your circle that are smarter than you and better than you in a lot of different ways, because you'll always grow. The moment when we think we know everything is when we need to quit what we're doing.
Yeah.
And so those people are necessary for guidance that you were talking about earlier.
Are you constantly, even now as in your position, and you've already had their experience as mentors and teachers, how do you continue to grow yourself now? Do you find other voices that you now respect and then seek them out as mentors, even in this virtual world? How do you do it?
Yeah, some of it I get from clients, in those types of encounters. Others are from still my pre-existing mentors who I just emailed last week and said, hey, let's get together. Usually we talk baseball, but there is no baseball. And let's catch up a little bit. And we'll talk a little sports, but then we'll also talk a little bit about life and, other aspects. So,
because relationships take work, right? Nurturing, you still need to give some time there to develop.
Well, and that's why, I think a lot of people come to somebody like myself to process some of these things, because truth be told, the 9-to-5s are done. And there's so many different individuals, regardless of blue collar, white collar, where you're in all these fast-paced careers or all these weird hours, and you're getting access through email and all this stuff where, that comprised of like, if you've got kids in sports, and it's time consuming to actually be able to nurture a really, deep level relationship is difficult to do.
Really difficult.
So some individuals utilize, coming to me, for those purposes, just for some objective guidance to talk about some deep issues that they don't have the ability to in their real lives. Not because they don't want to, but because how busy lives are.
Exactly. Or you don't know who you can trust, or maybe you moved and you don't have the same network and support group. I think that's a great thing about counselors is you guys are for hire.
Yeah, I'm like a consigliere from Godfather, or a life coach, or some of the kids I work through that are transitioning into college or trying to figure out different aspects of what to do next as far as their sports goals or academic goals. It's just trying to give them that support and guidance where either they're lacking that in their own lives, or they just need that third party to give them some of that guidance.
What's your outlook?
My outlook is always hope. And that's why I share so much with clients about my personal life, because if I can't tell you things that I've been through and how I've made it on the other side, that is the installation of hope. So for me, that's why I always have hope. I always have faith, because I know I've been through worse. And I always go back. And
even despite COVID,
absolutely.
We've never seen COVID before. We have never been in this level of divisiveness with Black Lives Matter. And no one has ever lost this amount of job and technology is going to take over and robots are going to rule us.
No, but
how do you still have hope?
Because it's will. It's will. There's individuals, there's those that do and those that don't. There's thoroughbreds, there's donkeys. And individuals that do have that mindset of keep going. We got to keep pushing through. It might be hard, it might be difficult,
but it's not over.
It's not over. It is not over. And that's the conversations we need to have. We need to have these positive conversations or just real conversations. And I always go back to a scene in one of the Rocky films where he's talking to his older son and he's telling his son, nobody hits you hard in life. Okay. It's going to knock you down. And then what can you do to persevere through it? You got to get up. You have to get up. You have to push. You have to fight. That's the will of a human. That's the will of man. That's what we have to do. We have to push through. We have to persevere. We know there's a lot of good people out there. Yeah. We have them as friends. We have them in the communities. We have them in families. There's a lot of good people. The world isn't as bad as Twitter, MSNBC, Fox News, CNN. Like, ignore all that. And if we ignore all those things, we see there's a lot of good, that's out there. And so like when you're asking that, yes, of course, 100%. Yes. People have lost the ability to think for themselves. They've relied too heavily on what Facebook tells them or what a Twitter feed feeds to them or who they're following. And they don't put their phone down, put their device down and do some thinking for yourself. Don't Google search something. Don't ask Alexa. Don't ask Siri. Take some time to reflect. Take some time to meditate. Take some time to actually read some literature off of individuals that are good sources, and then form your own opinion. Do not be a part of groupthink. Okay, that is toxic. That is dangerous. Whether you're far left or you're far right, because we don't grow as individuals if we just hang around with everybody that just believes the same thing and has the same ideals and the same responses to everything. No, that's how we regress. If we want to persevere, if we want to grow, then that's exactly what we have to do. But that's where a lot of individuals, they don't have their own opinion. They don't.
Is that because we don't know yourself? Is this more of we have to get to know ourselves more and ask more self-reflective?
Well, this dives into a whole different thing here, which that's, like I said, that's even another conversation on its own. But quickly, when we talk about consciousness, so developing a conscience, okay, where that comes from is daydreaming. So when you were you get in trouble as a kid and you got sent to your room, you didn't have a TV or a Switch or an Xbox, nothing. You sat there, you sometimes cried, you sometimes hyperventilated, cried, hoped that somebody would come around. They never did. And you had to self-reflect. Same thing would happen in schools. You get in trouble, Tony, put your head against the wall there and stand there for 30 minutes. And I'd hear, people laughing and you'd feel uncomfortable, you'd feel embarrassed. That's a good thing, okay? Okay, they weren't hitting me in school, but you made yourself, you got feel embarrassed because you sat with it long enough, right?
Yeah.
You didn't sit at the wall for a minute. And then you were likely to not do that again out of embarrassment, out of shame, out of guilt. With these kids today, they're programmed in, they're linked into screens.
Yeah.
A lot. So they don't have that time to disconnect. They don't have that time to be self-aware, to develop that level of consciousness and mindfulness. That's why there's a decrease in empathy and there's a decrease in mindfulness amongst the kids and amongst adolescents because they've become so self-absorbed. Whether it's TikTok, Instagram, but the screen exposure, they have no downtime.
There's no waiting anymore. No. You don't even have to wait for your food. You don't have to go get your food anymore. It comes to your door. Before we close, I want to ask you this because you get the privilege of truly understanding people on deep levels, and you get to witness the spectrum of people, right? You're not looking at specific types of people or only working with men. You are working with different groups and ages. Are people generally good?
Yes.
Is the world okay with the people that are currently living in it?
Yes. Things need to be broken down. in order for things to be built back up, in a way that we can evolve. And we can sometimes disagree with the way that things are broken down. Some good can come out of some bad things. And I think that's what we as a country, communities, and families and friends are going to see through this, in the end. I think there'll be that turning point where we recognize the sweet that comes out of the bitter, and how that's going to make us better people.
Well, thank you, Tony. I appreciate you.
It's something I think is going to be a good opportunity to get some information out to anybody that listens to it, and that's the whole goal of it. So I just appreciate you having me on.
Appreciate you for coming on.
Thank you for listening to Tuesdays with Andrea. There are hundreds of thousands of podcasts out there, and I appreciate you making the time to listen to mine. If you like this show and want to know more, check out TuesdaysWithAndrea.com, or please leave a review on iTunes or drop a line in the YouTube comments section. Until next time, please stay kind in your mind, nice on the web, and stay hella hopeful in your heart.